Team, we're ready to get started.
You bet.
All right, Michael, you want to start the, oh, we're already recording, huh? All right, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. This is going to be hopefully a fun and quick and rich hour and a half on a topic I'm sure we're all pretty much familiar with if you've elected to join us here. We intended for this to be the kind of the big meeting of Affordable Housing Month for San Mateo County stakeholders on accessory dwelling units. So let's try to make sure we get all the right insights and questions and discussions and answers hopefully into this hour and a half. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this Friday. As a sense of our roadmap here, we've got a large cast. So this is just meant to really cover our bases and allow for a lot of different ideas to be put on the table. We've roughly organized this into 3 chapters, and you're going to meet all of the cast members as we go into those chapters. I'm Derek Yang. I'm an executive director of a local nonprofit called City Systems. I also technically have a full-time job, which is a lecturer at Stanford, working on a lot of housing and climate and COVID kinds of data-driven projects in the community. We're going to explain a bit of the reasoning behind the specific structure, and then we'll get right into it, and then have some time for discussion and Q&A at the end of each chapter, hopefully a little standing and stretching as well, and then some closing thoughts at the end, and a little bit of a sneak peek if folks have seen a press release that went out yesterday about some exciting new grants for some of Peninsula projects. We actually have quite a few represented in this room, so we'll give maybe our first kind of public sneak peek on what those projects are at the end of this webinar. All right, hopefully that's what you signed up for and what you're excited to dig into. Let's start with some poll questions to just get a feel for the room. And I'm going to launch the poll right now for question 1, which is simply just whichever one is the primary sector you represent. If you're like me, you might have 2 different hats, but just so we know kind of what lens you're coming at ADUs from. Give a chance for most of us to fill that out. Okay, I'm waiting for that magic number of 30 again to fill out because we're almost there. All right, so this is most folks, so you'll be able to see the results here. So we're mostly primarily representing community nonprofit groups. I guess I didn't answer the poll. I might technically be the only one representing academia here then, which is fine. And then we got a good mix of government and private sector. It's great to see. All right, now let's start Friday morning, since I am from the academic sector, with a little bit of a quiz here. I want to get a sense of just where our baseline expectations of progress have been, which I think will inform really the whole conversation we have today. So I think everyone's familiar with, like, big stuff has happened since 2020 on the ADU front for state law. Let's first try to imagine what ADU production was in San Mateo County the year before that, 2019. Giving you 6 different tiers here. And I'm going to ask you to now give your best guess, and we'll see where the wisdom of the crowds is here. Okay. So I'm going to launch the poll again. This is the total number in the 21 jurisdictions in San Mateo County, using the best public data available of permitted ADUs in 2019. All right, go for it. All right, we already got to nearly everyone submitting this. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and let's see where everyone's expectations are. You can see the shared poll results. It looks like almost half of us think the number was between 0 and 100. I'm pretty sure folks are not saying it's 0, but you're probably thinking it's like a high number in the 2 digits. So according to the annual progress reports that the 21 jurisdictions submit to the state, The actual number is almost 400 in 2019. So we could say that maybe our collective group here is a little bit pessimistic about past progress. But of course, this could still be a drop in the bucket in terms of all the housing we all want to see. But that's just the first kind of potential resetting of expectations here. So if the number was around upper 300s across all 21 jurisdictions in 2019, now let's ask the question, okay, 2020, we had this idea of the promise of ADUs with big new legislative changes. And I think everyone either has that in the back of their head or could quickly Google what the 2020 legislative kind of push was for opening the potential floodgates to ADUs. So either you stick with your original assumptions or you've reset now to the idea that there was about 300 in 2019. Now let's check again with some of the crowds of how many total ADUs permitted in San Mateo County in 2020. All right, same multiple choice questions, and I'll launch the poll now. All right, some folks are taking a little more time to think about this one, but we're almost at the magic number of 30 people voting. Okay, here's the rough results from the group. So everyone's now optimistic about the effective policy, the effective culture, et cetera. Ready to see our best available data? It's not quite in opening the floodgates, but there has been a jump. The data is still a little bit uncertain because at least one jurisdiction may not have actually submitted their 2020 APRs yet. But it's at least in this tier that we're showing here. So the point here, I think, is maybe we all started somewhat pessimistic about just the state of ADUs, but then we were pretty optimistic about the role that policy could take and maybe our collective actions in promoting ADUs. And maybe the data as it shows is a little bit measured in between for both kinds of initial starting points. So a kind of logical question is, well, why didn't the floodgates quote unquote open as we would have expected in 2020 with this like big news at the state level and all this excitement that we had all collectively put into ADUs? And of course, this is just San Mateo County and not necessarily representative of other jurisdictions. Let me get one obvious answer to that question out of the way, and I don't think we'll spend that much time on it in this group, which is COVID. It obviously changed some of the expectations of just how much activity would happen on housing. Lots of other things were on people's minds, both the governments and community members. So we can sort of grant the potential impact of COVID. But I think the idea of this presentation is let's, with the expertise and the experience we have in this group, try to investigate a bit some of the other aspects that we've all been potentially working on and do an honest assessment of how successful 2020 and the start of 2021 has been on other fronts, and really just do our best understanding of kind of what really is that promise moving forward for accessory dwelling units and how do we get there together. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense as a context for how we're then going to structure this presentation, which is roughly we have three interlocking kinds of impact and drivers for really just upping those ADU counts and potentially especially affordable accessory dwelling units. There's going to be a whole group of presenters here who are really focused on individualized support, which is at the end of the day, who's really right by a homeowner's side, a family's side, as they go from wanting an accessory dwelling unit, maybe wanting to legalize an accessory dwelling unit, to having that roof over their heads. Now, a big part of that step does ultimately enter the doors of the planning desk, the city counter, and the whole formal permitting process. And that's a big size, though not all of the things that need to be part of thinking about individualized support. So we're going to then get into chapter 2, talking about city streamlining, and that's going to be relevant for the 30% of the audience here that is representing government agencies. And then all of that is under a larger context that maybe no one city or jurisdiction can really shape, which is just the continued regional forces, whether that's regional policies or programs, or just the kind of cultural movement around accessory dwelling units. So that's what the order we're going to go through these chapters. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you feel like you're going to be strapped in for a good ride here. And again, we'll have opportunities to hear from some prepared remarks from folks who've been involved in particularly East Palo Alto, but otherwise in San Mateo County in general. In these three areas, we'll have some Q&A time, some moderated discussion, and then we'll get to the end by 10:30. Okay. Feel free, by the way, to ask questions as we go through our conversation, and I'll be keeping a look on the chat, and we'll try to bring in questions you have on your behalf for the most part in our moderated discussions after the remarks. All right, so let's start with the chapter of individualized support, and we're going to kind of introduce three of our friends here, representing three different organizations: Hello Housing, EPA Can Do, and SOUP. And what you're looking at on this kind of just preliminary slide is this really is a view of ADUs in East Palo Alto in different stages of permitting or having already been built. There's quite a lot of activity, and the colors represent different organizations that are doing a lot of that groundwork to unlock the kind of opportunities for individual households who may otherwise have not necessarily gone through the whole process on their own. So that's the context by which we are going to investigate in this chapter just what role especially nonprofits and community-based organizations have played in providing this individualized support. I'm going to start that with introducing Jen Duffy here from Hello Housing.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. So in early 2020, Hello Housing launched Bright in Your Own Backyard, which is an ADU pilot program that was sponsored by San Mateo County and the cities of East Palo Alto, Pacifica, and Redwood City. And through this program, Hello Housing is able to offer free project management support to homeowners, helping them navigate every phase of the development process, from initial feasibility all the way through the lease up of a new unit. And I would say that San Mateo County was really one of the early adopters of ADUs as an important housing strategy and continues to be a model for other jurisdictions seeking pathways for easing ADU construction development. By seeing homeowners as partners in creating more housing throughout the region, an investment of only $500,000 in the pilot program is now creating 17 new units and counting of naturally affordable housing. So next slide, please. Participants in the pilot are building a variety of different types of ADUs. So we're seeing detached site-built single-story and two-story ADUs, basement conversions, detached modular and prefab units, and units that are attached to the main home. And I think this is a testament to the unique ways that housing can be created within the existing spaces available. But it also highlights to us that a one size does not fit all strategy when it comes to working with the built environment of our communities. Participants in our pilot are also building ADUs for a variety of different reasons. A little over 53% are building ADUs to support multi-generational living. 24% are building to support aging in place strategies, and 23 are building to create additional income to support the high costs of living in the Bay Area. Also, during our application period, we asked potential participants what were the areas of support that they were most needing. And we found that 39% of the responders reported needing help finding the right professional to work with. 30% of responders were having difficulty knowing where to start and what options to even consider. 23 of the responders reported having difficulty understanding the uncertainty about what it costs to build an ADU and what the different financing options might be that are available, and how those financing options really play out when it comes to constructing an ADU. And then 8% of the responders were seeking help in navigating the uncertainty of the permitting process with a pretty high level of anxiety about getting stuck. So we've ultimately been thrilled by the success of the pilot program, and we've been truly grateful for the dedication and perseverance of the homeowners that we're working with. Their stories have been amazing. The effort that they're putting into making these projects work has been profound, and it's been an absolute joy to work with them. We're happy to announce that we're going to be expanding this program into South San Francisco, as well as throughout Alameda County in the coming months. And we just really feel that this has been an incredible way to connect the policy that's taken place in 2020 directly to homeowners taking action. And so with that, I will pass it on to the next presenter in EPA Can Do, I believe.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ileana Nicholas, and I am with EPA Can Do. EPA Can Do is a 30-year-old organization that is based in and serves the community of East Palo Alto with expanding affordable long-term housing. Our Can Do ADU program launched in January after almost 2 years of working on 5 ADU pilots in East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. Our program helps participant homeowners through the 5 stages of ADU development, starting from assessment to the leasing of a unit. We provide active hand-on support for East Palo Alto homeowners who plan to build a detached ADU and income qualify as a low-income household or are willing to rent their unit to an income qualifying household. Next slide, please. Thank you. The majority of the work we do is supporting our homeowners with readiness. Just like the sustainability tool, each leg represents a component. And if one of the legs is missing, the stool cannot balance or function. What we learn is that it does not matter if the project is a new construction or an unpermitted unit that needs to be permitted. All the 3 legs will need to be addressed, whether that is physical, figuring out if the property can accommodate a unit, whether the household has enough financing, or whether the household will be able to come to a decision. Each of these legs unfold many layers, and we let our homeowners know that we are here to help. We have also been awarded, along with the City of East Palo Alto, a $2 million Cal Home grant that will make loans available to East Palo Alto homeowners to build and rehab ADUs. This is expected to help homeowners through the many stages of the ADU development, as well as address some of their concerns. For example, this will help with basic assistance on the ADU permitting process, as well as unexpected maybe systems upgrades that many times are a concern to our homeowners, and as well as a contingency, because as we know, the cost of construction is going up. So helping our homeowners with those processes. And again, our Can Do ADU program is a resource to East Palo Alto homeowners. Most of the work we do is free assessments and free financial readiness. And we help our homeowners through the entire process of ADU development, very similar to Hello Housing, and as well as what our next presenter will present, Pam with Sue. Thank you.
Thanks, Ileana. This is Pam Dorr, and I work with SOUP. What we really learned in our pilots that launched in East Palo Alto is that a lot of low-income homeowners end up in less costly areas where liquefaction and flood can be barriers, and really reducing the effects of climate change on low-income families has proven to be really interesting work with our pilots. So we're elevating families out of the floodplain so they can create generational wealth for their families. And I think our pilots are beautiful examples. I'd love to invite you all to come tour kind of the interesting work we're doing in Belhaven and East Palo Alto. They're really remarkable opportunities to see how barriers for families can be reduced. It's a complicated process. We all know from doing our initial poll, Derek kind of walked us through that we've all experienced that ADUs are tough to permit, but the new regs have started to relax that. We've started to become more competent in having set plans that cost less, but are also beautifully designed, have lovely finishes that are durable, that'll create a life cycle cost that's affordable to low-income families. So we're saving time and money for families, and we all need that. Can you jump to that next slide, Derek? I think the other thing that's been really remarkable that we maybe didn't expect was that we'd be able to help. Derek, would you move to the next slide if you can? Is really would be able to help local craftsmen and contractors get additional work right where they live. And that's been really exciting to employ local contractors who are making a difference for their neighbors. We're also starting with young job trainees who are working towards their licenses. So they're working alongside licensed contractors on our job sites to gain their experience hours. We're also just trying to figure out how to make things easier for each family to make this work. And we recognize that the financing is going to be a barrier for all families unless we have some more solutions. Thank you. But Derek, back to you.
So much. Thanks to all three of you. So let's bring everyone back there to discussion. And that's going to be roughly the pace of this webinar. We'll have these initial remarks and then hopefully just a lot of time for a few prompts I'll add, but this is now the perfect time to, if you have questions to share to this mini panel or to individuals, then feel free to start to drop those into the Zoom chat. So I personally think, kind of taking away experience of having been to a lot of different ADU events over the years, that what you guys just shared in a short amount of time, I think just crystallizes the really practical on the ground challenges that are being experienced now. Jen, you kind of mentioned there still is just the sense of like, I need a matchmaker to some degree. I need someone to help me go through this process. And, you know, maybe we just don't actually, part of that, I want to maybe turn this into a question, Jen. Part of that is it that there aren't the right professionals to support, or it's really a kind of, it is just that the network is complicated to kind of journey through as an individual? Is it more one or the other or both?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I think we are experiencing a huge flood of professionals entering into the ADU market, which is both exciting and quite daunting to try and understand. Being able to understand how different products work, understanding the cost of them, who to trust, who's going to be around, are all things that come up in our conversation. But I think it's also, you know, this is a really big investment that homeowners are making, and feeling like they can trust their own decision making and trust who they are identifying or who's being referred to them is really another big factor.
Yeah, to build right off of that, Ileana, to what degree do you think that trust is about, you know, am I going to be working with a good designer and builder and you know, a city that's going to help me through the process, and how much of that is, first and foremost, do I just trust you as my individualized support and the door you've opened to me to being aware of this work? And so where does, from your experience, kind of cultural sensitivity, language fit into this as well?
Cultural sensitivity plays a big part in this process. I mean, we work with East Palo Alto homeowners who have historically have had a lot of hesitation on welcoming help from outsiders. So having someone like a community member or a community leader or community leading organization in our community talk to them through this process, let them know that we vetted these contractors, these builders, these designers for you, and you can trust them because we already done the process for you. And many times, even with a little bit of hesitation, we just reiterate the fact that we are here to help them. We are here as a resource for them, and that they can come to us with any of their hesitations. Like I said, I referenced the sustainability stool earlier, and all those three components are very real components, and each of those three unpack so many layers that need to be addressed. And as a community organization and a community member, we make sure that we are able to address all those three components with as much as sensitivity and as well as trust in their community.
Great, thanks. Pam, I like that you went straight to a really wonky issue like flood resilience. I spent a lot of time on that from a sustainability perspective at Stanford. But I think it just emphasizes that there are like details, still innovations to be made on just how you actually deliver these ADUs so that they're affordable, but they also are long-term sustainable and resilient as well. And I see a question from Christy in the chat, so maybe we can just loop this in. And she's curious, like, to hit those price points, are you finding clear winners from a construction method perspective, stick built versus prefab versus panelized? Do you want to just quickly comment on that, Pam?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I think, Christy, one of the really important things is that every homeowner and every backyard are different. So we need multiple approaches, and we have to have a complete package available if families want that. Some love to go out and hire contractors and engineers, structural engineers, soils engineers, appraisers. Some people like to hire all of those people, and some need a one-stop shop to get that done. I think it's really interesting how nonprofits can support families getting through some of those barriers. And typically right now, stick frame, prefab, and panelized are working out to be about the same cost just because they're relatively new in areas of high climate that may have high issues like liquefaction. We really have to be thoughtful about what we're building and how we're building that so that we're not causing a problem down the line. I think that's really one of the helpful things to have. I think it's important also just to mention informal units need to be legalized, and we want to avoid displacement in our communities. And I don't want to underemphasize how important that is. That's something we can all benefit from. And I think wraparound services, not that every family wants those, but if it's available in a full range of services, it can serve more families.
Thanks. So we're going to be having a transition in a few minutes to the next chapter to keep on time. But thanks for the questions coming in. I've got some questions on the slide, but they're kind of contextual, and we're already hitting on some of them. So I just first want to quickly note that Deborah, who's going to come later in our webinar, asked Pam if you'd be willing to put a guess at the premium that is added when you actually try to account for climate. Feel free to maybe just type that in if you have a guess. But I think actually that's just in general concept that, like, to care about these long-term issues, it can put an upfront cost now. And that is butting right up against, we're also trying to lower the barrier of affordability and trying to often invest directly into that, whether it's through the programs that we all are a part of, or innovating on the construction front. So some of this can come into a conflict, but just really the bigger the pie is in terms of the funding that's available and the financing options that are available, then just more good ideas can be invested into the building itself and its design and construction. So climate is sort of a background thing we're considering from a resilience and an energy perspective. Maybe coming back to just pure affordability, because that's a question raised by somebody in the chat. I think each of our organizations has a commitment for sure to providing the service first and foremost to families who really need it. But then we might tackle kind of slightly different tiers of that affordability spectrum as well, so that really we're as equitable across all homeowner needs as possible. Jen, Ileana, as a kind of maybe last quick thought here, do you think that is the right kind of framing for individualized support? Kind of when all is said and done, when community members think about beginning ADU work in the community, is it fundamentally important that that conversation, the next part of that dialogue, is really driven by not the public sector, but by private sector organizations like yours, and framing that service as first and foremost available to the most at need households, or just what is maybe your vision of the fundamental relationship between private sector leadership here and then the formal public sector process?
I'm happy to start a comment on that. I think we need partnership all the way around with our government partners in this space. And I think we realize that our government partners cannot be the sole providers of affordable housing. The resources are limited, and we need to figure out how to best leverage their time, their impact, and their funding. And I think by working with private nonprofits and the private sector, and looking at working with homeowners on a broad level, really helps that investment go further that is needed. I also think project management support that's offered by trusted community partners can also safeguard the funds that public partners may deploy. And as we look at how we can help our public partners create different innovative affordable housing finance solutions, having partners in place to help homeowner recipients deliver on their ADU projects is a really important piece of the puzzle.
And I just want to echo everything Jennifer said. I really do think partnership in all aspects, financial, governmental, everything, it's needed in order to make this work be successful and to be able to help our homeowners as best as we can. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. I think we should go ahead and close this chapter, because we're going to definitely have the chance to come back to these topics and the closing thoughts and as they naturally fit into the next, because we're just adding layers really to the onion here. So thank you so much, Pam, Jen, and Ileana. You'll stick around and we'll be part of discussions moving forward. But let's go ahead and jump now to our next chapter, which is really the city streamlining step. I'm going to invite three new cast members to this section, but starting with Daniel Baruman, planner from the city of East Palo Alto. The first sort of just set the stage for what formally, officially kind of has occurred in terms of updating the local ordinance process and some of the basic pieces of the permitting process in East Palo Alto since 2020.
Yes, thank you so much, Derek, and thank you everybody for It's good evening this morning. As many of you know, SB 13, AB 68, and AB 881 have reduced barriers to ADU approval and construction by further streamlining the process and limiting development standards and fees. This reflects the legislature's and governor's position that ADUs are an important part of the solution to the housing crisis. Now coming more localized, on November 17th, 2020, City Council voted to update East Palo Alto's development code pertaining to ADUs, including for compliance with California state laws that went into effect on January 1st, 2020. The updated city ADU ordinance became effective on December 18th, 2020. Some of the changes included prohibiting a minimum lot size. Before the legislation, EPA's standard was 5,500 square feet for an attached ADU and 7,500 square feet for a detached ADU. The max size, allowing for a minimum sized 800 square foot ADU. Prior legislation, maximum you could build would be 700 square feet for lots under 6,500 square feet or smaller, and additional square foot based on the lot size over 6,501 square feet. The max size for the ADU was retained at 1,000 square feet. Setbacks at 4 feet on the rear and the side. Front setback to be alignment with the front of the primary dwelling, which is usually 10 feet, and 6 feet setback away from the primary dwelling, provided it does not prohibit the building of an 800 square foot unit. Previously, there were increases in the 5 foot side setback and 6 foot rear setback, and 12 feet side setback if this unit was on a corner lot. Height is now allowed to be at 17 feet. Previously, the standard was 15 feet for accessory structures. Site coverage and FAR are not limited for any unit 800 square feet or below. And open space restrictions, 50% of the rear yard and 750 square feet, only apply to units that are above 800 square feet. Other important measures included prohibiting cities from requiring replacement of off-street parking if the parking structure is converted to an ADU, i.e. a garage. We see a lot of garage conversions here in East Palo Alto converted into JADUs. And requires decisions on ministerial ADU applications within 60 days. Previously is 120 days. And that leads us into the zoning review procedures. The modifications to the zoning review procedure on ADUs and JADUs was implemented on January 1st, 2020, the same time as 2019 ADU legislation took effect. A zoning clearance procedure was established to improve the overall ADU review efficiency. The zoning clearance form is basically a short questionnaire to find out more about the project and a checklist of key information staff is looking for when assessing an ADU application. For example, what are the existing conditions? Is this a single family or multifamily structure? Is this property in the flood zone? Is the property historically significant? Does it belong in the historic resources inventory list? Is there a code enforcement case involving the unit? And what's the ADU size? This has impacts on impact fees. The second page is really outlined for the building division itself. And some of the details include what application materials need to be submitted, such as Title 24 energy compliance, structural calcs, geotech and soils report for ADUs of a certain size, elevation certificate if the structure is in the flood zone, and the elements of what a complete building plan set consists of. Some of the practical challenges for streamlining of ADUs, especially in 2020, as Derek mentioned, COVID, ADU legislation coincided with the pandemic, which city staff had to adjust to, especially in an environment when offices were closed to the public. There was limited staff and applicant interaction. Digital plans were now being requested instead of hard copies. And for a short time, there was a temporary moratorium for projects during the early phase of the pandemic. Staff capacity. East Palo Alto is not like other cities or jurisdictions where there is dedicated staff to process ADUs. It's really a collective effort between planning and building staff to intake and process ADUs and JADUs now. On the legislative process, it wasn't so much slow from staff's vantage point, but some of the legislation was unclear to staff. For example, there was ambiguity when it came to fire rating walls and stated setbacks. Information could have been more clear, made more clear to cities for an easier transition in creating our ordinance. Ultimately, staff is striving for a more efficient processing of ADUs with assistance not only from the divisions departments within the city, but partners outside of the city as well. we're certainly welcome to any suggestions. With that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Rachel Horst.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel, the housing project manager with the City of East Palo Alto. And we are happy to be working with our community partners like City Systems and EPA Can Do and others, SOUP, and Hello Housing, to streamline the process on the city side. And what we're showing you here on the slide is just a visualization of one of the major challenges that any development proponent, like an ADU homeowner, faces. And that is, like spokes on a wheel here, there's not a one authority or a waterfall of authority. It's actually the responsibility of the ADU homeowner to go out to each of these separate agencies and obtain authorization and pay fees. And so one major challenge for homeowners, like for any developer, is that lack of information from the beginning as to what the requirements actually are and what fees are that they're going to be responsible for. And the city, as you can see, is one part of that, but it's not the only part of that. And so a big challenge that we have identified and are now working through to try to ameliorate for an ADU proponent, for a homeowner, is just how can they navigate that process so that their costs and time, which is the cost, are ultimately reduced. And so, as we've pointed out here, it's really that the asymmetric information, meaning that these agencies know what, including the city, what costs could be there behind the curtain, what costs could develop as the ADU project makes its way through the process. And so it is really incumbent upon us as separate agencies to make that information available upfront. And that means by placing it on our website, by being transparent and consistent above all, because surprise costs are the worst thing that can happen, to any homeowner looking to build that ADU or convert to an ADU or JADU. And there is a dependency amongst all of these different agencies. You need to have all your ducks in a row in order to be able to actually realize your project. And that's very difficult for anyone to navigate, especially as an individual who's probably not an experienced developer. So what we specifically have been working on is not necessarily, you can't make systemic changes all at once, but really just chipping away at this issue. So speaking to impact fee reform, which we have here on this slide, again, we can't necessarily change our fees overnight or wipe out fees overnight. But as we have more ADUs come through the pipeline and understand ADUs as their own housing type, because they are different in terms of their impact to the system, to the surrounding neighborhood, to the network that they're tapping into, as we come to understand it as its own housing type, we can calibrate our fees. So we don't necessarily need to wait until we commission a new Nexus study or the next time around that we adopt new impact fees. We can say, okay, we take a percentage based on, we build a methodology around what we understand about how ADUs fit into, the larger housing stock and the market that they occupy. And another thing that we wanted to highlight, at least from the City of East Palo Alto's perspective, is within our inclusionary housing program, and that's what we have here, as an alternative to paying an in lieu fee. We have inclusionary housing in the City of East Palo Alto, developers have expressed interest in providing an ADU. So instead of owing, maybe a fee for a fraction of the unit that they owe, they would provide an ADU. And with manufactured ADUs available, that is actually an attractive choice for the developer. And it may be an attractive choice for jurisdictions as well, because for years, cities have faced the challenge of developers, quote unquote, feeing out instead of providing the unit. So is it possible now to net more units and make them available concurrently with the market rate development instead of having that in lieu fee? So is that an option that we want to adopt as a policy? So we're still looking into that as a city, but that may be a very promising option. And then just looking to this slide, we have this really cool a buildable area lookup tool that City Assistance has built for us. And having partners like this is really key, especially to jurisdictions that, as Daniel said, don't have a dedicated team that can necessarily be working on basic tools like this. But this is something that, in addition to knowing what fees and what other requirements are there up front, just being able to know what you can build as a homeowner and to visualize that is something that's really important to set expectations, before even embarking on the approval process. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Boris from Heart to talk about a really cool program that we've been working on together.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everyone. So for those that don't know, Heart has put out a program called GLADDER, which stands for the Green and Livable Accessory Dwelling Unit Resource. And overall, the goal of this initiative is to make it easier and more affordable to build green ADUs. We do that by providing free construction documents, and I'll go over briefly of the designs, a free ADU green handbook that'll help with not only these designs, but with any sort of green ADU design and construction. And as well as peer reviewing the designs within local San Mateo County jurisdictions. Now, the designs themselves, and I've provided some renderings, we have 4 designs. They're templated designs, obviously. They can be used anywhere in California because we made sure that they pass all state building codes, Title 24, and as well as with the future codes in mind. And we built them to make sure that they fit all within the 800 square foot limitations, as well as for the studio and 1 bedrooms to be within the 750 square foot for impact fee limitations. So make sure that they're not impacted by that. They have 2 different architectural styles. That's a modern style that I've included. But overall, they're completely free. You can go on our website, download them, and use them as can be by any contractor, any architect. It's completely on you. That way, it saves homeowners thousands of dollars in the early obstacles that we know people have to get started. The same thing with the ADU handbook. You can feel free to use it. Go on our website. It's completely free. The main part here we're going to be speaking about is, creating streamlining through the permitting process, which was a major kind of benefit we wanted to add on to this from the beginning with not only ADU designs. So in working with the jurisdictions, obviously this has never been done before, especially on a multi-jurisdiction process. So it was completely from scratch. We had to figure out with cities, everyone works differently, especially during the pandemic. That was also a very interesting process. But in the end, we wound up working with 5 jurisdictions as a kind of a pilot phase: Redwood City, South San Francisco, Daly City, East Palo Alto, and Belmont. And then we are going to work with all the other cities to open it up for our next phase 2. We kind of spread it out based on capacity, resources, and funding availability. And the way that the process has been going is we allow the cities so far to either do it through a third party, so it's more streamlined, or in-house themselves, depending on what the preference is. And while they may differ in their levels of peer review, because we understand that everyone needs to be comfortable with what they're willing to offer, they all do provide streamlining benefits to homeowners and incentivize the residents of that community to use our designs to standardize and help build green ADUs. So obviously these are general plans. So applicants are still going to submit a site plan, and they are still subject to zoning and site-specific conditions to review. But overall, we've actually been very glad to see that all of the initial pilot phase cities were able to take all of their city-specific regulations, notations, requirements, and input them into that one set of general designs. So we don't actually have to create city-specific pre-reviewed designs, which we initially thought might be the case. So that goes to show that in the end, everyone's general requirements are all pretty similar. And most of the comments we received were all pretty standardized and similar as well. So I'm sure there's gonna be a lot more questions, but we are looking forward to providing these designs to the public, which regardless if the jurisdiction is peer-reviewed or not, feel free to use them. You can use outside of San Mateo County. But for the peer review process, we are starting locally and hope to keep expanding. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Boris, Rachel, and Daniel. So here's a few questions to seed discussion. And I think it's already clear how some dots have been connected between the kinds of problems that the nonprofit and community-based organizations were helping, right by the side of the individual, and then just these kinds of doors that get opened and barriers that may be met once you start to go through the formal permitting and review process. And in this chapter, we started to kind of map that landscape a bit more and find ways in which the City of East Palo Alto, HART, other stakeholders have been trying to simplify that process once it becomes a formal application in the door and a formal set of drawings submitted. I think the first point here is really just the ultimate point, which is, of course, prior to any consideration of streamlining, like part of what's complicated about this process is that it is a very individualized situation. Like whatever happens when you first submit your drawings, you're kind of unsure, and it could be very different than the next person who submits an ADU application. And maybe there's the promise of, can we streamline in the sense of making more and more of those steps expected, reliable, regularly occurring. But I think fundamentally, there can't be a perfect one size fits all, as has been noted many times. And I think each of your points have kind of come across maybe some quick wins there to kind of simplify and streamline and standardize where possible, but you still need to leave some room for variation and possibility there. Rachel, you kind of emphasized that surprise costs are still there, across the different agencies, and then you emphasize a different important separate point about interagency kind of collaboration there. And Boris, you kind of introduced that, we can kind of simplify and standardize plans, but at the very least, you toyed a lot with just how many different architectural styles to still leave those options to homeowners and at least 4 different sizes. So I'm just curious, maybe quickly going back through the 3 of you, just where do you stand at this point on, like, have we done as much as we can to streamline? Is there still more that can be standardized about the experience that a homeowner goes through? Or have we started to hit that point where kind of the rest still needs to be case by case, and we need to develop the best structures to make sure that we can always handle the unique and individualized needs and situations that that applicants face in this process? Feel free to maybe just a quick comment here and there on that, and then we can move on to other points. But just kind of where do you stand on streamlining versus case by case?
From our point of view, just in working with cities, obviously, right now we're working with multiple jurisdictions, but the homeowner will only be working with that one city. So in theory, they should have the same set of guidelines to work with. But in terms of, I know I've heard that it depends on who you get at the time, might look at the plans differently, which is why we're kind of in the sense of peer reviewing the designs, that every staff there is familiar with them. And that, I think, is a great thing of just familiarity with design. So we understand that, people provide unique designs almost every single time, and staff has to review them. And it's understandable that people might see other things and be more stringent or kind of more relaxed in their views about them. I think it definitely helps with the state providing the guidelines. A lot of jurisdictions we've talked to are now kind of understanding that, let's make this kind of all standardized in the sense of, we need to make these all kind of allowable and approve them, finding a way to approve them, and not, hey, we're unique, we're different. I know that city probably would approve it, but we won't. So I think a definitely shift has been really kind of created in we all roughly have the same standards with a few unique, obviously items, but overall, in the end, we saw the similar comments. So I think in the end, cities are more similar than they realize. And I think just transparency and early feedback would be great. But obviously, I'm not sure how that goes when you have a unique design submitted every single time.
Yeah, Daniel, to turn to you, kind of, I know you have experience in the planning review process, which is a little bit different once we go to building review. But just kind of as you reflect on pre-zoning clearance form and checklist kind of structure, and now, like, has it basically improved the way things have gone? And this could have been a reform that happened, years ago, or what has maybe then become slightly more complicated, or just introduced other kinds of concerns as we're moving towards this one checklist fits all kind of approach to review? Or would you say it's all been exactly the kind of right things to do?
Well, I think we're heading in the right direction. I think there were certainly bumps in the road. I think one of the things that I was just hearing Boris talk about, and what came to mind was there was some discussion about potential, gathering of the mind. So all the divisions and departments involved with the ADU review, planning, building, engineering, so even some of the outside agencies, Menlo Fire, Sanitary District, all really kind of gathering together and establishing a time to just review ADUs just at a certain designated time. Maybe it's twice a month or something like that. I know that was discussed early on in the process when we first heard about the legislation, and I think that's something that we can certainly strive for, because I think, and that goes to sort of question number 2: what are the bottlenecks and barriers? I was just thinking about. It's really all about collaboration and communication between the departments and divisions, and I think that's where things can sometimes maybe not be as clear, especially for those working on the other side. Obviously, the applicants that are coming to us. We want to make sure we are providing clear direction on the city and review side for applicants to come in and be well aware of what the process looks like, as opposed to, kind of just taking it step one, planning, you get cleared, now you go to building, but there's not that level of communication. I think there needs to be more collaboration amongst the divisions and departments reviewing ADU applications, and I think that's somewhere we can certainly improve on.
Wayne is asking a question partially towards me in the Zoom chat, which is that I have been working with Rachel and the city staff on trying to map out this problem landscape. And we kind of came into it from the nonprofit community with our own anecdotal senses from folks we've worked with. For me, kind of going through that process a bit so far, interviewing some of the applicants that have had experiences going through ADUs in 2019, 2020, the biggest surprise to me was really Rachel's point that she emphasized, the surprise issue. And those surprises tended to be across silos. So it's sort of like the experience with an individual starting point, say, Daniel at planning was like, no problem at all, and a great experience. But then it was like, then you got to switch over to the unexpected additional sanitary district fees and costs, and that like embroils in a whole other debate. And just what exactly do I need to send to the assessor's office and back? And there became questions of why isn't this handled more cleanly behind the scenes for me, when I would have assumed there was a kind of one step or a single pipeline process. And I think that tended to be the seed of confusion and then frustration in many cases, which to me sound like, as Rachel, you were suggesting, kind of there can be more work behind the scenes to really just make that information more available in one place. And just imagine that there's no reason for any individual agency to necessarily collaborate and find one document in which all these fees are actually listed in one table. And it's in part taken our work in the nonprofit community to help build that for the first time. And I suspect something similar as an issue in other jurisdictions. I keep coming back, Rachel, and working with you in particular to your role being someone unique here, that you have some ability in your role as a housing manager in the city to really just discover these opportunities and problems from the city side. And I find that to be quite important, and it's a kind of hint to the question of how much is technology and it's very specific policy important here versus just having change makers within institutions that are willing to kind of reach out across other agencies and have enough flexibility in their job description to even enable that in the first place. Don't feel like you have to pat yourself on the shoulder, Rachel, but how do you think that's like your job is common, and do other cities have the ability to kind of explore in this interagency way to help with streamlining, or at least interdepartmental?
I think so. I hope so, but maybe it's not necessarily obvious until you have the opportunity. So in East Palo Alto, as that comment from Dwayne points out, we have a framework, we have a reason to be working together, we have a contract or a grant or what have you. And that's really our occasion to meet on a regular basis and to exchange ideas. And this is the way that we've really discovered some of these key barriers, things that you wouldn't even think about when you're going through the daily grind of processing applications. I think for people who are in the housing, have a title related to housing and housing divisions, we have a particular interest in building more housing and making housing affordable. I mean, this is across the board, in our county. I think, you can say of all staff. And we're not necessarily the ones who are signing off on these applications. So it is really incumbent upon us, that's really the role that we play, is to be able to take a little bit of a bird's eye view, at least within the staff structure, to say, okay, this is what's going on in building, this is what's happening in planning, let's sit down, let's try to think through this, because I can take the time to do that because I'm not working directly on these applications. And just going back to the example of the impact fees, right? We've had this discussion. It's great when a project fits in the box and the state has, created that box, or Hart helps us create that box, and you fit it in the box, and, short of going to a vending machine, you can end up with a product that is, easily passed through, planning and building and all the other agencies, hopefully. But, in some cases, it doesn't fit in the box. But what does it mean that, you're 6 inches beyond the outside of the box, right? What does that actually mean in terms of quantifiable impact, in terms of, should this or should this not be approved? And just thinking through the implications of when a project is unique, but maybe still, within the realm of reasonableness, thinking towards that ultimate goal of having more ADUs, of adding to our housing stock, of having more affordable housing. I think it's important to have, someone really just, constantly beating that drum. But I think you need both. I think you also need the technological tools, and you most certainly need outside partners that are constantly, pushing you to think that way.
So Boris, your program is a kind of segue into the regional conversation a bit. So I think we're going to come back to some of those themes in our last chapter. If I can end this section back to you, Daniel, to try to link it back to individualized support as well. As clearly, as we've talked about before, the local ordinance update in 2020 finished in 2020, but it led to specific standards that at least some number of community partners and members of the community would have liked to see even more progressive opportunities. The state law basically allowed for ADUs to be built everywhere, but there was still ultimately a cap from a local perspective on the max size being 1,000. It could have been 1,200, right? The max height being 70 feet. It could have very, very formally allowed for 2-story ADUs, the height associated with that. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, there's always going to be that role, right? There's the desire of the public and a lot of different conflicting opinions about just how quickly, how to advance ADU production. And then there's the many differing opinions potentially within the city and elected officials that ultimately lead to legislation. Just how do you see that dynamic continuing over the next year? Are we going to see potentially an updated local ordinance, and what may lead to that kind of change in the future?
Yeah, we can certainly see, obviously we're trying to balance, understanding the need for more housing, and certainly the appeal for looking at all the possibilities for ADUs and JADUs to be part of, our housing stock. But we also understand that there are, certain concerns sometimes when you're building at a certain height or you're building at a certain size, because we do have zoning standards to work with. And, we have certainly opinions from, those residents and neighbors that we have to factor in. So it's certainly a balancing act. I think we could certainly see ADU legislation and changes in our code as time goes on. I certainly would bet on that. I just think, on the city side and city staff side, we're constantly trying to balance the desires of certainly those advocating for ADUs and promoting lease restrictions to understanding what some of the concerns are from neighboring properties. So it's a balance, but I think we're certainly open to having those conversations, and if changes need to be made, we're certainly there at the front lines to make those changes.
All right, thanks, Daniel, Boris, and Rachel for chapter 2. Let's go ahead and as we transition to chapter 3, this is maybe a good time if you've been sitting this whole time to just quickly stand up and get a bit of a shakeout on your legs and so forth, because we're going to then be able to keep the blood flowing for the last 30 minutes here. I'm going to introduce Deborah and Josh into this last question, and really from Daniel's last point there, I've also gained a deep understanding for what role the city staff plays at the front line of that legislative change. But at the same time, you guys have your hand behind your back in many cases with regional policies and programs and just decisions that are somewhat out of an individual jurisdiction's control. And that could be just that so much of the local permitting process is affected by those other agencies, local that Rachel mentioned, sewer districts and so forth. And there could just be true kind of frontline battles going on there. And then there's still the larger question of how this relates to regional and federal strategies. So I think we're going to move to that scale even more formally in this last chapter here. And started off with Deborah from Casita Coalition, sort of from your perspective, what have been the challenges statewide, and then what is the role for the limited scarce resources we have to mount these really strategic regional efforts?
Well, before I say anything about that, I've been advocating for ADUs for 25 years. The state has been for 35 years working away at zoning. The last 3 years were big changes to reduce zoning barriers to developing ADUs. And I am just shocked and overwhelmed and excited about how many of you people have taken your own initiative and to work on a particular problem. It's a very diverse set of problems that are coming up. And it's very, very impressive how you've each found a niche and you want to work on that one. And that's what it takes. It's that kind of leadership it takes to move forward and begin to look at housing as a whole, as opposed to sort of like what Rachel said, instead of it being zoning and building and fire and public works, you have a housing policy in a city. And with ADUs, we're committed to making them low cost. So, everybody's input makes a difference. It's sort of a reflection of how we got in the housing crisis in the first place. And now we're trying to undo that through ADUs. So my hat's off to you guys. It's amazing, and keep up the good work, and anything Casita Coalition can do to help, we will try to help. The big thing that I think we're looking at now, and some of what you guys have realized already, is the equity issue. The ADUs are built primarily by people of upper income. When you look, there's a new study out by Karen Chappell that has some amazing statistics in it statewide of, until you're making over $100,000 a year, the likelihood of building an ADU is small. And, ADUs are the thing that can make families survive. So it's the income, and then you look at how people fund them. It's primarily with cash and traditional bank loans. That's, almost all of the funding. So for low income people, even if they own a home, as you're learning, they don't have the income to repay a loan, so they can't get a loan. So for us, the big issue is making resources available to low and moderate income homeowners so that they can actually build ADUs, which have such a huge positive impact on the community. It's not just about housing. It's about preserving a community and allowing people to serve their families. So that's that's our big push, and there's good news coming down along that path, I think. The second is that the zoning issues have been primarily, a lot of those barriers are gone. So now what we see are building code issues, utility issues, this kind of plethora of all different kinds of regulatory agencies, where individually what they think they're doing is fine, but when you add it together, it's a barrier to ADUs. It's a harder nut to crack. You can't just pass a state law like we did affecting zoning. So, one big issue is the building code, where we would love to see a small home building code, which would include fire and Title 24. to really look at the impacts on us on an ADU. I mean, we apply the same standards for a 3,000 square foot home to a 500 square foot home, and it's killing a lot of ADUs. So that's the other area where we're pushing. And the third problem is the same one that all of you are struggling with, is the problem with local compliance, sometimes purposeful, sometimes because they just don't understand. The contractors that I speak with say that about half of their projects, they have to go in and teach the local government what they can and can't do under the state law. So a lot of the solutions that you guys have worked on kind of address that problem, and it's one that we'll work on more with through Casita Coalition. But those are I think our three biggest challenges now. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to hand this over to Josh to share the screen here. So you'll temporarily see slides go away there.
Give me 1 second, everybody. Okay, hi everybody, I am Josh Abrams with Baird and Driscoll and with 21 Elements, a countywide group that helps cities with housing policy. We don't advocate, but if cities want to do good housing policy, we help them. We did things like build the ADU online resources and workbook. I'm actually going to talk mostly about the survey that a couple people, Debbie and a couple other people have mentioned. This was a survey where we partnered with UC Berkeley. So we sent out 1,000 postcards to people who had built ADUs in recent years, directed them to an online form. So 10,000 postcards, so about 850 responses. It was pandemic times and also election times before that, so it was not the best time to do an online or a mail survey, but still 850 is enough to get a pretty good snapshot of what's happening. So UC Berkeley wrote a summary report, and here I am today talking about it. So the biggest obstacles, I think this is good to know, the biggest obstacles, 3 of them, the cost of construction. This is a really hard thing to address. That I think Derek will talk a little about some ideas later. The pre-approved plans can help a little bit. We'll talk about it a little more. That's a challenging one. Design constraints or challenges is another one. There's trying to get the size that people want onto their yard in a built out area. I know this is actually personally, this is why my family stopped going down the ADU path. They just couldn't get it to fit nicely in their yard. So that's really hard to deal with. And then local approval process, actually, so I started with the third, second, and this is the highest, 50%, the largest number of people said this was their obstacle. The good news is, like, we can deal with this one. This is totally in our control. My sense is that we actually need city councils to weigh in. Most staff are too busy to really to tackle it on their own, but city council has to say, come back in 9 months, figure out what you can do, report what you've done, and then staff will prioritize it. Without that type of direction setting from the top, it's just hard. And I should also say that 21 Elements put money in our budget this year for any city that wants to work on process improvement. We will work on them with that city. We'll redesign your forms, help you redesign the website, help you work with your different partners, whatever is needed, a one-on-one basis, and then we'll share whatever things we come up with for other jurisdictions to use. So the cost of construction, here's what I find really interesting. So Los Angeles is about $197 per square foot. Orange County is about $200 per square foot. Central Coast is $223 a square foot, and Bay Area was $329 a square foot. So this is an even bigger, like, oh no. Los Angeles and Orange County have really well-established ADU industries. There are many more contractors in the field, many more prefab options. So I think in the Bay Area, that's something it's not as evolved, and maybe that's driving the cost. Otherwise, it's hard to figure out what's driving the cost, because Orange County is that should be a high cost market as well. Just a brief bit on the rental prices. We know that about half of ADUs are available at no cost. So we cut out, these are ones that are in the long-term rental market. We cut out all the ones that were being used for offices, or 8% are being used for vacation rentals. So this is just the one long-term rentals. About half are being available for no cost. Another 20-ish% are available for family members at a reduced cost. So that's the majority of ADUs. And the ones on the open market where they're just renting to people they don't know, mostly you can see they're in that low income or moderate income price range. So that's I think what other speakers were talking about. There's good evidence it's a naturally affordable source of funding or source of housing. And then a few just there's a bunch of information in the report. We can actually put a link, or we can share it afterwards. And then the apartment unit size, and Derek and Sanford and I have been talking about some interesting analysis we can do looking at ADU production per 1,000 eligible lots. And I think that's a good way to start to kind of look at how jurisdictions are, which ones are doing well and which ones have challenges. So that's also some information that we're working on. Okay.
Thanks for that, Josh and Deborah. So we're getting close to the end of our third chapter here, and sort of everything is included in what has just been emphasized by Deborah and Josh, maybe just taking a more regional scale and sample of insights. So we find that the problems we had just been describing in East Palo Alto and San Mateo County are in part shared by the Bay Area, and then in some ways are shared statewide. But Josh was also just emphasizing that maybe there's a market problem with just the choice to bring down the floor of cost for ADUs in the Bay Area. You kind of hinted at this a bit, Josh, but there's so much potential influence that elected officials can have in a jurisdiction to really move the gears of policy and program reform at the city level. But if you step one level up, then maybe there are just other carrots and sticks that can be played at the regional level, and I think there are structures in the county, like 21 Elements, just providing free support. That is a kind of carrot. And then there's regional and state level programs and things on the horizon, like RENA, that can be wielded potentially in both ways. So we want to just say a little bit more, Josh, about introducing, what is the relationship between the RENA process that cities are starting to go through in the Bay Area and ADUs in particular.
Yeah, so all cities have to write a housing element due in 2023, where they have to identify enough land available for housing. And many cities are really struggling to make sure they have enough sites. ADUs count. It's based on your recent production trends. So now is a perfect time to push ADUs, encourage ADUs, because it'll help you get a certified housing element or meet your RENA number more easily. Specifically, you'll look at your annual production and then multiply by 8 years, because it's an 8-year plan. So every ADU you build next year will reduce the number of sites you have to identify in other places, or effectively reduce your RENA by 8. So start now, like it'll help you, I promise.
Yeah, let me just spell that out a little bit even more explicitly from a city's perspective. So let's say you're a city like Atherton, and you've done a handful of ADUs over the last few years. You average between 10 and 20 between 2018 and 2020 per year. So you are producing ADUs. You might want to hit your RENA targets and propose that we're going to triple or quadruple ADU production, and that's how we're going to hit the targets that have been set by the state across different affordability levels. And there's probably going to be some point at which you can't actually make that claim about production. So I think what Josh is hinting at is that there will be ultimately some level of guidance, which we're in part trying to shape, that will peg that to some degree to your actual production targets, or what you've actually produced in 2020 and 2021. So then that to me is a kind of carrot, because then that's really clearly motivating jurisdictions to do as much sort of internal streamlining and potential policy and program reform, and opening the doors to all these nonprofits helping now, like in the next 6 months in 2021, because your actual formal count of ADUs there may just be your best asset to then claim a healthy rate of ADUs moving forward. And that just helps for the housing element process, but that just helps, increase ADU production in period, which is something I think we're all interested in here. Is that a right way to frame it, Josh?
Yeah, definitely. Totally.
So I think that is going to become more and more of a strategic discussion across, city planning staff and community development staff, and really convened and brokered at this regional level. And I think that's a really powerful way to just add one more level of game theory here, besides, and maybe put the fire under some cities' belts to say, like, if you're counting on ADUs, as we all are, being an important, strategy for housing, actually, it now matters to get those numbers up, right now, like in the next 6 months. And hopefully that just allows for more cities to be open to the kinds of innovative ideas we've been talking about this whole hour and a half. Deborah, anything to weigh in on sort of your view on RHNA, but also just the other legislative kind of fights and litigation kind of fights that need to happen?
This issue about individual versus regional, my observation is, because I was a planning manager for many years, so I've seen life at the local level, and now looking and working on the state level. The most important thing I think a local government can do is deal with the surprises. Once you see that what it looks like sitting in the shoes of an applicant or a homeowner, a lot of jurisdictions have said to me, oh, we have a checklist of everything. And I say, well, are utilities on the list, or fire requirements on the list, or public works requirements on the list? If your jurisdiction can look at the whole, say, what is the whole of what you have to do to build an ADU from zero to moving in, and what are the costs? What is that cost to the local government? Because there are some huge costs that people aren't aware of, like requiring them to replace a curb cut can be $15,000 to $20,000. Well, that could be 20% of the cost of the ADU and could kill it right there. So as much as you as local governments really look at the totality of what's required and start to keep data about that, because as we move to regional, this is why this has been so exciting to me. No one has yet compiled the experiences that all of you are having at the local level to know what works and what doesn't work. And it's too often I see people get all excited about something that sounds good, but if you really study it, you find out it didn't really, it felt good, it sounded good, but it didn't really have much impact on getting them built or lowering the price, which are the two big focuses. So, collect the data if you can as a local government, so the world can evaluate these different pilot projects you're doing together, not just yours, but all of them together, to see what works. And then we have the basis for pushing that at a regional or a state level. Because it's really very early in the overall development of ADUs. There's lots of activity now on different topics in different places facing different problems. So to know where to go regionally, you need some background information, and you need to have focused on the totality of what the impact is of the regulatory requirements to build the ADU, or else you don't really know the true story of what it takes to build an ADU and how to lower the cost. So this is an excellent first start toward that.
I want to echo what you're saying, Deborah, by, kind of another way to think about these 3 chapters is that in chapter 1, we focused on the ways in which just individual families can sometimes feel siloed in their knowledge about how to go through the process, and just the other marketplace kind of network of actors. Then we, in chapter 2, talked about the silos and just like departments within a city, and then across agencies that really need to directly collaborate in the way you're describing, Deborah, on an ADU permitting process. You introduced just one last important point to cities, which is like, you're also potentially siloed in, like, the challenges you're facing are shared by other jurisdictions. You're not alone when there really are barriers that are potentially out of your control. And then we all potentially have solutions that are useful to each other, but that just requires opening the door to help and support and convening and, other actors to really help fight those regional and state level challenges as well. So like, there are just many actors that should all be collaborating and coordinating more across these different scales.
And I'm hoping that Casita Coalition will, as we ramp up, will be able to provide a platform for that kind of sharing. We're starting some of that now, but and a lot of our members are saying, look, if I just knew what everybody else was doing, I could maybe solve this problem quickly.
Josh, you want to share one idea of what you think that could look like institutionally in San Mateo County, and what would be like a quick win there, focused on the 21 jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think San Mateo County has done a good job with individual, really tight hand holding through the process. I don't think we've done a good job with lighter touch, broader outreach. So I think if you look at Napa, Sonoma, their regular webinars, or back in the day, in-person meetings, to get people interested, kind of, if you think of it like a funnel, get them from thinking about it to interested to doing it. We have a lot of resources for the people a little lower down on that funnel. But I think a really important thing is to get the word out more broadly. Do organizing events like a tour of ADUs, webinars. And then I also would love to see a nonprofit that is just charged, their role is to promote ADUs, to work in partnership with the good ecosystem of groups we have now.
Similar to Napa and Sonoma County and some other locations.
I just make one other comment there. As money becomes available, and it is becoming available to help low-income homeowners build ADUs, I hope more governments will engage in that process, much as they used to over the years do other kinds of housing. So then you have your housing group trying to support low-income homeowners, your regulatory groups trying to make it as streamlined and cheap, as inexpensive as possible. But that takes leadership at the city level to see both opportunities. And that's where I think local governments are really in the best position to realize what they can do and with leadership run with it.
And I think that's a perfect segue to closing thoughts here. So thank you, Deborah and Josh. We sort of thought about just what the best takeaways are of these 3 chapters. And we're going to make sure, if you've been registered as an attendee, you're going to get these slides afterwards in the recording. Is really to frame this from the jurisdiction perspective, like Deborah said. Hopefully this is giving the sense that you're not alone. There are so many other partners at the community level and potentially at the regional level and across a region. But so much of that conversation needs to be initiated by a first lever that a jurisdiction pools to really just open that doorway to conversation. So then we sort of just tried to synthesize some of the key ideas across the webinar into what you can do alone, as if you're a jurisdiction in San Mateo County or elsewhere. We've emphasized the importance of streamlining internal ADU permitting, and that there's still a lot of innovation and experimentation that needs to happen here, and sharing. And 21 Elements, as an example for San Mateo County, is there to help with this process. Like if you haven't updated your local ordinance, or haven't initiated checklists and some of these other kinds of programs at the city level, those are great things to do now, especially because those numbers may matter for 2021 to drive just what you can then use in the housing element process. Opening up to partnership with other jurisdictions, there are these interagency issues. And again, this might be a critical first door for you to open, to just create the context in which those problems can be clearly described, transparently described, and worked on. And then to voice the challenges you're facing, because the more city power there is lobbying and advocating for this at regional and state levels, then that's an important tool as well. And then all the way back to chapter 1, just open that door to the ways in which sometimes having a community organization in the face of this work, the front line of this work, is actually just going to be more effective. And then you're just getting helping hands on so many of these important remaining barriers at the individualized level. And just encouraging you to welcome that kind of support, because it is probably there in your community waiting to be leveraged. I want to close with just 5 minutes here to show one promising thing that's happening in just around East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, North Fair Oaks area around Facebook. They have put forth $1.5 million in a housing innovation fund, and went through a process to find grantees. And there were 5 in total. This just went out in a press release yesterday, and you can see this news article, and I'm sure other ones will show up in the next couple of days, just kind of announcing that this work has begun. And there are 5 organizations that received parts of this funding. including 3 that have been represented in this group here. So EPA Can Do, SOUP, and then my own nonprofit, City Systems. So we figured, since this is maybe just one piece of the larger pie of knowing that we've have this view of the challenges and opportunities, and we are able to leverage philanthropic funding to make a head start on some of these key opportunities. Maybe we'll just quickly say a little bit about what we're hoping to do with the Housing Innovation Fund, and maybe we'll start with Pam. You want to say a quick thing about kind of what your funding will be used for?
Sure. Thanks, Derek. I think the most important thing is that without support, low-income families that have equity won't be able to move ahead with ADUs. And I think that's the thing we'll focus on the most this year. The other thing is really taking market rate properties off the open market, permanently deed restricting them, adding ADUs, and helping families own and rent those so they're affordable in perpetuity. It's essential. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Eliana, you want to say a bit about the kind of collaborative project with EPA Can Do and others?
Yes, so EPA Can Do, along with our local community land trust, Pahali, and Yucca Youth United for Community Action, a youth leadership organization, were recipients of this grant for our pilot model project called Placekeeping for the Placekeepers. So if you might have learned recently in the media, the Yucca headquarters was facing development, but with a lot displacement, but with a lot of community support and donations, Yucca was able to purchase this site, making us and getting us one step closer to jumpstart this model. So in this model, what we hope to do is acquire residential properties, put them in our local community land trust, and as well as build 2 ADUs per property to start a scatter site co-op of East Palo Alto housing for our placekeepers here in our community. So very excited for this, and thank you.
Great, thanks, Eliana. And I'll say a little bit about the City Systems project. Probably most directly of all the challenges and opportunities we've described, we're probably most directly tackling that 329 number, Josh, that you shared in your slides, and just like, how do we lower the floor of cost here? Somebody in the Zoom chat mentioned that maybe why LA's costs are low is because they do more garage conversions, and I think it's fairly common sense to everyone that a garage conversion by definition will be a little bit cheaper than any other kind of ADU you can do. But we think we can even push that floor even lower and just have a option that kind of opens up a whole new market. Of course, this is not meant to be the high-end option, but an option that still is great housing for a garage. And part of the innovation we think is to do some prefab here, but think about that strategically as something you kind of like plug into the garage in a potential number of configurations. And then probably even more importantly, we're not a for-profit. We're just going to make these designs completely open source. And hopefully that opens up the market so that many manufacturers can do this and can say, I'm a manufacturer that will do a duo plans. I'm a designer who will help you submit a duo plans. I'm a general contractor that will help you assemble a duos on site. And everyone speaks the same language there. And it actually drives maybe the price is lower, but then also increases the diversity of options there so that this kind of approach just grows over time. Now, this is all a goal over the next 2 years to try this out. We bring some modular and prefab experience and then just all the other kind of connections we have in the community. But this will require having some households in East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, North Fair Oaks who are interested in trying this out. And we'd love to pilot a duo with some families in the next couple of years. So we already have an interest form online. If you think you're a property owner who has been trying to do a garage conversion, but has faced some of these cost barriers, and then we'd love to immediately start to have some conversations with you all. So there are 2 other great projects. United Hope Builders is putting out a prefab factory in East Palo Alto, and then Symbium is one of these great tech-enabled tools to further increase access to information for families hoping to start the process. And there's a whole ecosystem, which I'm really excited about, since we all already know each other and have the opportunity to find synergies that just increase the amount of support that exists in East Palo Alto or sort of centralized in East Palo Alto, but then has implications region-wide. So with that, it is 10:30. There seems to be a great group here thank you so much for taking the time and sticking with us to the end here. Hopefully this is just, if you haven't had a chance to get to know us, as you get the kind of follow-up emails, we're going to include our contact information, and hopefully this just opens the door to more conversations and partnerships and services we can offer to you or to others in the greater community. So of course, we wouldn't have time to get to know every one of you in just an hour and a half here, but really want to thank my colleagues here to present all this work today. And I think I speak for everyone to say we're all open to getting to know more folks and advancing this work collectively across the region. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.